I am one of you. And I will fight for you.
Long before vampires became a household name, something very different ruled the Knights of Earth. Something else feasted on the blood of lonely travelers. And this monster did not just drink blood. It feasted on human flesh. The monsters I am talking about were introduced, and from dusk till dawn, and were the reason behind all the vampire stories in the world, especially the US and Mexico. Directed by Robert Rodriguez and written by Quentin Tarantino, the 1996 movie gave us the Culebra, an ancient race of serpentine vampires that led their victims to a fate much worse than death. And in this video, I am gonna explore everything there is to explore about these unique vampires from the Dusk Till Dawn franchise. But before I begin, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons that you see on your screens. These 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos. And now, let's begin. History of the Culebra, the Nine Lords. As I mentioned earlier, these guys were not the typical vampires from European folklore, also called Waxel Ubacan, or Los Culebras. They were serpentine in nature and had Aztec or Mesoamerican origin. In fact, Los Culebras is Spanish for the serpent. If codices are to be believed, all Culebra originated from a mistress of the snake god. She was a young lady who had turned into a blood-sucking demigoddess. Many centuries ago, the Culebra lived in the hellish underworld called Xibalba. Here, they served as slaves to a demonic race of higher beings, who were led by Queen Amaru. Needless to say, this social structure placed the Culebra at the very bottom of the hierarchy, and they were left open to face terror and abuse at the hands of the demons that ruled them. In fact, the torture was such that the disobeying Culebra were often subjected to extreme forms of punishments. For instance, if you were a Culebra who defied your master, you could very well expect castrated. Not the human castration of your privates, but your fangs, since you're a vampire and all that. For this purpose, Queen Amaru kept with herself a band of enforcers. For example, El Caporal. And it was these enforcers that ensured Amaru's dominance over Xibalba for thousands of years. However, all tyranny comes to an end at some point. All slaves fight back at some point, usually when they have nothing to lose. And the story of Xibalba was no different. At some point in the long history of these serpentine vampires, 9 individuals decided they had had enough and devised a plan to escape. They escaped all right, but what really infuriated Queen Amaru was that these individuals took to calling themselves lords. I mean, Queen Amaru would have accepted 9 escapees, but slaves calling themselves lords? Well, that she could not accept. Is anyone else smelling any anti-racism undertones here, or is it just me? Anyway, the super angry Amaru followed the 9 lords, determined to slay them in order to teach the would-be dissenters a lesson, but she had greatly underestimated her opponents and learnt her lesson the hard way when they trapped her before killing her. However, the 9 lords did not stop here. They feasted on the flesh of Amaru, but Amaru's blood was considered to be too powerful to be wasted away or consumed at once, so the 9 lords decided to preserve it. The task fell upon Lord Celestino Occulto, who extracted Amaru's blood and kept it inside a blood well for safekeeping. Of course, he was made the protector of the blood well. Although the queen had been slain, the Culebra were still not free. They had to take care of the remaining Xibalbans. To facilitate this, the Culebra approached a demon-hunting fellow vampire named Il Huicamina, so I will get into it in detail later on. But I just want to quickly mention here that all Culebra, apart from their vampiric abilities, have one ability or power unique to them. So, Il Huicamina used his skills to trap the remaining demonic Xibalbans in the labyrinth. So, one can say that the vampires won the war against their demon masters. The terrible things that the lords later did. Many years passed, and the serpentine vampires prospered. By now, the lands of Texas and most of Mexico were called Tlaltecpac by the Culebra. This was the first real piece of land that the Culebra ruled over, and it became their home for thousands of moons. Modern time arrived, and with it came the white man's burden. Spanish missionaries arrived at Tlaltecpac to spread the word of their God. However, they instead met the minions of madness and horror in the form of our blood-sucking and flesh-eating snake vampires. This is pretty much how the modern myth of vampires came into being. As for the 9 lords, they came to be known as brothers and sisters to each other, and each of them built an elaborate, albeit illicit, operation that ensured they were all fed. The eldest among the 9 lords was Lord Armancio Malvado, who established the best of these feeding plans. Also around this time, Lord Celestino Occulto was seen by humans as a powerful man who could rid them of the Culebra scourge. Of course, they did not know who he really was. Oculto tricked thousands of the poor villagers into offering their souls to get rid of the serpent men menace. They fell for it and committed mass suicide. The wicked Oculto then buried their bodies in a single location, and their souls became Barolo of Sangre, which could be loosely translated to wine of blood. Basically, all that pain, all that agony of these thousands of unfortunate people was concentrated in that single location, the burying place, and it served as the blood of the king, which secretly made Lord Celestino Oculto the king of blood. The prophecy of Santanico Pandemonium, the Mayan mythological text called Popol Vuh, spoke of a prophecy. According to this prophecy, two heroic brothers would free a priestess named Santanico Pandemonium, and she would become the reason behind a dark fate for the Culebra. Santanico would become the end of the serpent vampires. Now, in reality, the Popol Vuh is a foundational, sacred narrative of the Quiche people from long ago, before the Spanish conquest of the Maya. It includes the Mayan creation myth, the exploits of the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanca, and a chronicle of the Quiche people. Clearly, the From Dusk Till Dawn franchise has taken quite a bit of inspiration from the Mayan and Mesoamerican mythologies. Now, coming back to our story, I say that Santanico was to be freed, which only means that she was captured by someone. Well, yes, the Nine Lords, in order to avoid their dastardly fate, locked up Santanico in an isolated prison for nearly 500 years. Needless to say, she was forbidden from ever leaving her temple prison. However, some managed to enter this prison and were often made to traverse through the Akabi, or the labyrinth of the mind, a maze-like place. This was basically a test to go deeper into the bowels of the temple, and those who passed it would move ahead and find the sarcophagus that contained the blood of Santanico Pandemonium, which was the only thing that could free her from her prison. But getting your hands on Santanico's blood was no easy task. The blood sealed her powers, and to ensure that she remained powerless, it had been placed within the body of a live snake called the Sasik Ukib. Needless to say, many enemies of the Culebras tried to get their hands on Santanico's blood so that she could be freed, but the Nine Lords had done a great job with safeguarding it. Many were captured and trapped within the bowels of the temple. One important name among these was Calavera, as a Balban demon. Sometimes, the Lords would bring humans into the temple as sacrifices, and it took some time, but life went on, and people slowly started to forget the horrors that the Culebra caused. The serpentine vampires were reduced to stories people told little children at night. By the time modern day came, Culebras were remembered as a race of blood-sucking reptiles from ancient times that hunted unfortunate souls at night, only to tear them apart. But of course, the creatures were not gone, and all the so-called myths around them were in fact true. Not many years ago, there was this prospector who accidentally found the well of blood that Lord Celestino Oculto had been guarding. In order to hide the blood well, the Lord built an oil company around it. One Professor Aidan Tanner also read the Los Culebras, and he knew they existed, but he believed they were simply a cult that followed a serpent god. Of course, he was proven wrong when he really met the Culebras. Finally, after a wait of nearly 500 years, Santanico Pandemonium's wait for freedom ended with the arrival of the Gecko brothers, the prophesied heroic brothers. Santanico sent them to the labyrinth of the mind so that they could complete the test and free her from her temple prison. Of course, the first thing she wanted to do after getting her freedom was quenching her thirst for revenge from the Nine Lords. But she was not going to stop at that. She was going to topple their entire shadow empire of horrors, blood, and flesh upside down. But she also knew that the Lords, especially Lord Armancio Malvado, would be after her in an attempt to imprison her once again. However, Malvado died before he could achieve his objective, and with his death, the task fell to Richard and Gecko, who had to agree to capturing Santanico, because if they refused, the Culebras would have launched a massive genocide of humans, innocent humans. But there was yet another player in the story, the Zabalbans. These demons once again made their move to attack their former slaves and bring about their absolute annihilation. And on the other hand, Queen Amaru, although in hell, was on her own mission to stop the Culebras. All about their anatomy, powers, and weapons. Though they are called vampires, they are not really the traditional vampires. As I was mentioning earlier, the Culebras had more in common with serpents than bats. Their bodies had glossy scales, and their wings stretched wide like leathery coils. Each of these serpentine bloodsuckers had a set of sharp, conical fangs that lay flush against the gums until they snapped open like snake jaws. Behind these fangs, the Culebras have venom glands that release toxins that could poison prey in seconds. Apart from these features, the Culebras had one special power each, and no two Culebras shared the same extra power, kind of like how our fingerprints are. I wonder what would have happened if the Culebra ruled the earth and increased in numbers. I mean, how many different kinds of powers would they then have developed? Anyway, these powers, these unique gifts, were called Wayobs, and young recruits required time before they unlocked their full potential. Some could whip out a forked tongue to seize distant targets, or rip weapons from an opponent's grip, kind of like the mutant toad from Marvel. Others possessed brute strength that let them tear through flesh and more with bare hands. Still more could compress their bodies to slip through narrow cracks before reshaping themselves to full size. A rare few sprouted extra limbs at will and turned limbs into lethal grappling hooks. Unlike humans, who were probably motivated only by sex and food, hunger ruled every Culebra's mind. After transformation, their thirst for blood and flesh grew with each feed. They not only consumed flesh, they devoured souls. Victims' faces faded as the Culebra assumed their features for a short stretch, then slipped back to reptilian form. In that guise, the creature accessed memories, secrets, and even talents once held by its prey. Each meal added fresh powers, knowledge, and skills to its arsenal, a dangerous gift that bound predator and victim in a deadly embrace. These serpentine vampires struck down humans through a venomous bite. That toxin had a second purpose, though. It triggered transformations of a human into a Culebra. Only the ancient Otomi, baddest bloodline, resisted that curse. So as I was saying, the injected prey initially lost their lives, or something on those lines, only to rise again as Culebras. Upon their resurrection, their wounds healed because of the venom's strange magic. Another change that took place was the regrowth of limbs and mending of organs, so that they could now have a new existence altogether. In the submandibular region of the Culebra, you could find his or her venom sac, which was said to be more powerful than any muscle and served as the source of regeneration and raw power. Although the Culebra could transform into their monster form, as and when they pleased, most chose human guise to sneak among the living, because being in human disguise meant that they could walk among their prey undetected and attack whenever the timing was right. Despite that advantage, one fatal blow to the heart shattered their body into dust, much like all vampires we know. While most of the European vampires find themselves annihilated when subjected to sunlight, the Culebra did not outrightly die, but got serious injuries and burns. At least this was the case with most of them. To remove all doubts, I think I would surmise that stronger Culebras could endure brief exposure, but weaker ones crumbled into ash under its rays. Their hardened scales deflected many wounds, yet cold proved fatal to these cold-blooded predators. Even a headshot could leave a scar on their will, though their bodies could survive the trauma. The Culebra Society. Within their hidden society, feeding followed a strict social hierarchy. Lower-ranked vampires roamed human settlements as ravenous hunters. They tore into prey and delivered the finest cuts to the elite. Counselors, who often acted as lieutenants to the highest orders, oversaw those hunts. The entire race organized itself into 9 houses. Each house held dominion across human realms and flaunted wealth beyond imagination. Culebras rose through ranks by proving their value to their family. Those who used their gifts for house profit earned greater trust and status. At the summit were the 9 lords of the night. They treated each other as siblings, brothers and sisters, who were united by darkness and blood. Together they wove the laws that kept Culebra society in balance. Their will drove every mission, every sacrifice, and every brutal initiation. The 9 lords held a taste for games that tested mind and body. I mean, this is the only logical explanation behind the creation of the labyrinth of the mind, which housed the key to the defeat, as well as victory, of the famous Santanico Pandemonium. The labyrinth of the mind was truly an ever-shifting maze of mental trials. Any soul trapped inside faced illusions drawn from its own memories. Only those who safeguarded the purity of their thoughts could break free and reach its bowels. A single wrong move meant that you faced a fate worse than death within those spectral walls of the labyrinth. It was pretty much designed to ensure that no exit lay in sight, save the one path granted by the mercy of the 9 lords. With the advent of the modern age, humans rarely saw the Culebras. Society painted their tales with the colors of folklore and myth, thereby pushing those monsters into shadows. Culebras learned to operate from hidden chambers and secret temples, and it served them well. There was hardly a point in showing their true self or nature to the world, when they could hide in the shadows and continue their existence. I'm not sure if you have watched Sinners, the 2025 vampire movie starring Michael B. Jordan and directed by Ryan Coogler. But the movie starts in 1932 and ends in the modern times, with 2 vampires surviving through the decades. Their continued existence was only made possible because they chose to live a life of secrecy. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, among the 9 lords, Lord Malvado held the title of Pactacatl. The term usually refers to an Aztec trader, but here we can call him the chief collector of tribute. His agents, the Aztec, moved like silent wraiths through human streets, ensuring streams of offerings never ran dry. Coins, livestock, even fresh blood kept the wheels of power moving above and below. Any lapse in tribute risked swift retribution. Despite their monstrous nature, Culebras built a cult around serpent worship. Their lairs bore ornate serpent motifs, carved into stone. Murals depicted the vision serpent, a deity they believed granted ascension to higher ranks. Blood offerings and carved chambers sealed pacts with godlike forces. Dedicated temples served as both feeding grounds and holy sites. Walls bristled with glyphs that traced ancient creation myths back to the Popol Vuh. Every symbol spoke of rebirth and renewal, core tenets of Culebra doctrine. Only in these sacred spaces could a Culebra perform the rites necessary to claim new powers. Each sacrifice, marked by ritual chants, echoed through vaulted halls and bound the leaves of dark fate ever tighter. Marvelous verdict. I have written hundreds of scripts for Marvelous videos and explored a lot of different kinds of monsters and vampires, but I gotta admit, the Culebra from Dusk Till Dawn have fascinated me quite extensively. These creatures of the night were pretty much the brainchild of Quentin Tarantino, but their origin was thrown light upon by director Robert Rodriguez. He is clearly one of the best Mexican-American filmmakers that the genre has known, and he has often incorporated his Latino heritage in the work he gives birth to. And the good part is that it hardly feels forced or woke. While the film ended with showing that the Titty Twister bar was basically a part of an ancient Aztec temple, our guy Robert Rodriguez expanded the Mesoamerican lore when he created and developed the From Dusk Till Dawn TV show for his El Rey network. He wanted to bring to life the Mayan and Aztec bloodsuckers who had existed in Mexico's vampire-rich culture, but never saw the light of day. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.